Hi, the name of the show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it. And as you can see behind me, I have the entire world. And I'm going to give it a spin. All right, if I can grab it here, and I can. So I'm going to give the traditional spin of the earth behind me. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about Pakistan. Pakistan's right here. Here is India, and I'm going to spin the world a little bit, try to get India and Pakistan a little bit into better focus. And why am I going to talk about Pakistan? And I'm going to talk about Pakistan for two reasons. One, we are embattled here in Afghanistan right now. We're fighting a war. This is a different war from the war in Iraq. Iraq, by the way, is behind my head, right over there. And the reason it's different is because we have more allies. And we have more allies because we're fighting an enemy that was recognized by the entire Western world as the enemy of the entire Western world. And that enemy is the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. In 2001, as everybody knows, Osama bin Laden sent some of his followers to hijack planes and fly them into the World Trade Center and into the Pentagon. The resultant carnage was about 2,800 Americans, almost all of whom were civilians, almost all of whom had nothing to do with the war, the military, or Islam, or anything. And basically it was a horrible atrocity. It ended up that Osama bin Laden, and of course we had known this for many years, was stationed in eastern Afghanistan over here. Let's make it a little bigger. See if we can get the borders to show. So here's Afghanistan over here, and there were right along the border of Pakistan were Al-Qaeda trading camps. And the Al-Qaeda people that attacked the United States, even though they were headquartered in Hamburg over here, and other European and Arab countries, many of them came from Saudi Arabia over here. The center of jihad, or the center of Al-Qaeda, became Afghanistan, and the head of the Afghan government, a Sharia government, that controlled about 85 to 90% of Afghanistan. It's called the Taliban. The Taliban were basically the people who had gone through certain Muslim schools, and they were part of the Pushtun ethnic group, which is over here in this part of Pakistan, called Waziristan, and also about the southern and eastern kind of one-third of Afghanistan. But they are the largest single ethnic group in population in Afghanistan. And some of the opposition, who were also called Mujahideen, which means holy fighters, were in northern Afghanistan. That was called the Northern Alliance. And the whole series of events kind of got kicked off by the assassination of their leader of the Northern Alliance, the opposition to the Taliban, by an Al-Qaeda person masquerading as an Arab journalist who blew himself up and killed the head of the Northern Alliance. So there was a war already going on in Afghanistan. The Taliban hadn't completely solidified their control. And we went in about November and December of 2001, a few months after 9/11. We overthrew the Taliban, and we put the government of Karzai in there. Meanwhile, the Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda people withdrew to the caves at the edge on the Tora Bora Valley, and there was a battle at Tora Bora a few months later. I believe it was February of 2002, but you can correct me on that. Could have been earlier. And during this battle, basically, instead of taking the control of the whole area and sealing off the border, we allowed local tribes to take the lead of the battle. I guess they thought that the Afghans were on our side. And basically the bottom line is Osama bin Laden, Zawahiri, who was his #2 man, got away, and they escaped into the border of Pakistan, which is called the tribal area. And this tribal area is composed mostly of the same ethnic group that lives in Afghanistan. They're Pashtuns too. So here's Pakistan over here. Now, what is Pakistan? Pakistan is important to us because originally the British Empire went all the way over here, controlled Kashmir, followed this line over here, Nepal, all of what today is India, all of Sri Lanka, all of Bangladesh, what's today Bangladesh, which was for a while East Pakistan, and all of Burma, all the way down to here. And then the English Empire also included Malaysia, which is this peninsula over here. So the British Raj, the British control of the Indian subcontinent, was a tremendous enterprise, gigantic. They built railroads, they united this into what became India. And just as the British Empire was falling apart, there was lots of opposition to the British in the 1920s and 30s, most of it organized by Gandhi. People know who Gandhi is, and the Indian Congress. And basically, they resisted the English government by refusing to trade salt and to collecting the salt themselves. The tax on salt was one of the things that kept the British Empire going, and a bunch of other marches and civil disobedience and so on and so forth. The British came to the conclusion, just as World War II was about to start, that there was no way that they could hold India and this Indian subcontinent, including Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Burma, without the support of the Indian people. And kind of a deal was made under the table that as the Japanese were taking over China, Indonesia, Indonesia's down here, Indochina, all this area, the Indians would support the British against the Japanese Empire so long as a deal would be made that after World War II ended, if the British won and India stayed independent of Japan, that the British would give the Indians their independence. Now, basically, there were two main organizations. Most of the Hindus live in this area over here. This is the Ganges Valley. But at the end of the Ganges Valley, most of the people over here are Muslim. And this whole area over here, which is now Pakistan, was basically Muslim, as was Kashmir, that is now the northern little piece of India. Most of all of this area over here is almost entirely Hindu, although there's still 100 million Muslims kind of scattered throughout the whole empire over here. This island over here, which is also under Britain, is mostly Buddhist, but had some Hindus in it. The Buddhists are called Sinhalese. The Hindus are called Tamils, and they're the same people that live over here in this edge of India. And today, there's still a war between the Tamils and the Sinhalese. The Tamils would like a little country that they had back in the 1400s restarted, which was a Hindu country on the edge of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was called Ceylon back in the British days. So basically, India, the Indian subcontinent, was split up by religion. This area in here, plus this tribal area over here, was reserved for the Hindus. It became India. This is Nepal. It's mostly Buddhist, as is Sikkim, and that had its own king. This area over here is Pakistan, and was reserved for the Muslims, as was Bangladesh, which was called East Pakistan at the time. This area over here is now called Burma. It was called Burma then, but was really part of the British Empire in the subcontinent, and it's mostly Buddhist, and it was separated out, even though it has many, many different ethnic groups, as was Ceylon, which was mostly Buddhist, and this Sinhalese ethnic group. So meanwhile, this area here in India, many, many different ethnic groups, 100 different dialects, 20 major languages, and the languages are so mixed up that there are some dominated by one state or another, that the Indians actually, in business and between ethnic groups, when there's a business meeting or a political meeting where different ethnic groups and different language groups are together, they'll speak English. And India, oddly enough, in the 1800s, the British set up what they called the ICS, the Indian Civil Service, and the Indian Civil Service became the basis, really, of the future Indian government. And basically, the English had Indians as the people in their army. They were called sepoys. They created an Indian Civil Service. Indian people ran the railroads. They set up many, many universities, so a lot of educated Indians, so that by the time they became independent, the Indians basically were able to set up their own country. However, right before the agreement to decolonize India, for the British to clear out the two wings of the Indian independence or movement, the Hindu wing, which was the India Congress Party, and the Muslim wing, which was the Indian All-Muslim Congress. I forgot the name of it. But the Muslim side was run by a guy named Ali Jinnah. And Ali Jinnah, at the last minute, just as they were agreeing to become a big, basically super country, an empire, so to speak, in the Indian subcontinent, probably after China, China and Russia, Soviet Union, the third largest agglomeration and probably the second biggest in population power in Asia, the Muslim leader, Ali Jinnah, came out and he said, no. He said, we want a separate Muslim state because we don't believe that the democracy that was envisioned by the India Congress Party for India was going to give us a fair break, because at that time there were about probably 450 or 500 million Indians, of which about 1/5 were Muslim. And we're talking 1947 over here. So at the last minute, the British agreed. There was a General Mountbatten agreed that, all right, we are going to go along with you. We're going to separate the Indian continent between a Muslim part and a Hindu part. We're going to call the Hindu part India. We're going to give it its independence. On the same day, we're going to leave the Muslim part. We're going to call that Pakistan. Now, a lot of people think, well, there's people called Pakistanis. They've always been Pakistanis. Actually not. Pakistan is a acronym. In other words, a bunch of letters put together with Stan at the end. Stan in Hindi means land or country. So P for Pushtun, A for Afghan, K for Kashmiri, I for Indus, which is the entire Indus River, which is the main part over here, S for Sindhi, which is this part over here, and of course they were also given East Bengal, which eventually became Bangladesh, which is the Muslim part of the state of Bengal. And the state of Bengal went all the way over here, all the way over here, down here, and the largest city was Calcutta, which even then was a gigantically overpopulated kind of a hellhole. That's where Mother Teresa lived. So this gigantic state of Bengal ended up becoming split in two with a Muslim side and a Hindu side. So what ended up happening? Pakistan became a separate country with two wings. This part in East Pakistan, separate ethnic group, a separate language called Bengals, and they're also Hindu Bengals too, really had nothing to do with Pakistan. Pakistan was set up on the English style, set up with elections, with political parties, with courts, Supreme Court, independent judiciary, the whole thing. Very, very soon after it first separated, it also became for a while a military dictatorship, and then military dictatorship was replaced by the original electoral system. There was a parliamentary system, and it went back and forth from dictatorship to parliamentary system, back and forth. And basically, there were two main parties. The party that founded Pakistan, Pakistan People's Party, became dominated by a family of the Bhuttos, B-H-U-T-T-O, Bhutto or Bhutto, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it correctly, and they are still around, and they were in charge in the 80s. They were overthrown. For a while there was a military dictator, then there was another military guy who started his own Muslim party, and his name was Nawaz Sharif. And Nawaz Sharif was overthrown. And he was overthrown, first of all, by the Bhuttos, who came back. They were charged with, the Pakistan People's Party, they are Western-oriented and believe in elections and independent judiciary and the whole thing. They're a little more Western-oriented. And then there's the Muslim Party, and the Muslim Party still believes in elections. And then there's a military, and then there's the very, very secretive and very, very powerful ISI. The ISI is the intelligence service of Pakistan. Not sure what the other I is. But the ISI were the people who put the Taliban in power. And way back in the 1980s, when Russia or the Soviet Union had taken over Afghanistan as a communist country, the opposition, of which Osama bin Laden was a part, was financed by the ISI, which was at that time an ally of the CIA. The problem is the ISI, they're the people who also set up the Pakistani nuclear program. Pakistan has nuclear bombs. They probably have about 50. They have not ICBMs, but just short of that. They can actually bomb Israel if they wanted to. They could bomb Europe. But most of all, they are afraid of India. There's been 3 wars, direct, full-up, total conflicts between India and Pakistan. In 1947, 1948, when the two countries were separated, there were riots from one end of Pakistan all the way to the other end of India. 500,000 people were said to have been murdered in the course of these riots, and about 20 to 30 million people were displaced. Even today, one of the largest ethnic groups in Pakistan, what are called Mohajirs, which kind of means immigrants or refugees, and they are descendants of Muslims that were forced over the border. Almost the entire population of the Sikhs, who mostly lived in Pakistan, were forced over the border when the state of Punjab, just like the state of Bengal, had an Indian and a Pakistani side. Punjab is over here. It's the breadbasket of India. It's basically one of the most advanced in business back in the British times. The Punjabis, they speak their own language, are very famous for being very, very good businessmen. And they basically had 3 religions. Some of the Punjabis were Hindu, some of the Punjabis were Muslim, and some of them were Sikhs. And Sikhs are a religion that kind of came from both the Hindus and the the Muslim side in the 1500s. They had a leader, and they had basically created their own country. By the time the British were taking over in the 1700s, they fought the Sikhs, and the Sikhs controlled what is today the state of Punjab, right? Actually both sides of Punjab. And the Sikhs, they all carried knives as part of their religion, and they just fought the English tooth and nail for about 10, 15 years, and the English finally made an agreement with them to absorb them in the empire, but to leave them as a separately recognized religious and ethnic group. So in Chandigarh, which I think is on the Indian side, there's a golden temple, and the golden temple is the center of the Sikh religion. There's a little history there because at one point radical Sikhs tried to secede from India, from the ones that had been pushed over from Pakistan to India. They had tried to secede from India. Indira Gandhi went in, captured the Golden Temple, and what the Sikhs called a massacre. And the Sikh bodyguard is a tradition that the Indian president would always have a Sikh bodyguard. They were tremendous bodyguards and so on and so forth, murdered the president of India, Indira Gandhi, and brought down her party from power. So there's a lot of history here between Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and Burma. But the significant event that's just occurred, the President Musharraf, who's our ally over here, our ally in the war against terror, kind of caused a problem because he made agreements with these Pushtun tribesmen not to attack them in return. The Pushtun tribesmen promised that they wouldn't support the Taliban, but they did support the Taliban, and the Taliban really attacked Afghanistan. This is about 2006, with even more vigor, and created a bigger war for us and for NATO over in Afghanistan. So in the course of all of this turmoil between the radical Islamists and President Musharraf, who's also the head of the army and the head of the intelligence service, the head of the Supreme Court was dropped and expelled from Pakistan. And the reason was Musharraf wanted to be both the head of the army, the official general-in-chief, and president at the same time. That's basically against the Pakistani constitution. So he lost that struggle. That head of the Supreme Court, Chaudhuri, kept his post, was put back in his post by the independent judiciary, which is a surprise, and very, very much weakened Musharraf, who's our ally. And the result was this Supreme Court just announced that Nawaz Sharif, the prime minister that was overthrown by Musharraf in the first place, when Musharraf first took power, would be allowed to return to Pakistan. And meanwhile, there's negotiations going on with the other party back from when Pakistan was a democracy or something of a democracy before Musharraf took over. Musharraf has been a dictator, basically, even though they've held elections, they're not very free, so that she can run for prime minister and Musharraf can remain president and in charge of the army, but she objected to Musharraf controlling the army and being president at the same time. So that's the bottom line right now. So there's tremendous amounts of unrest here in Pakistan. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. India has nuclear weapons. China has nuclear weapons. Iran has a nuclear program. So there's no real end to this. I could go on for another hour about Indo-Pakistani history. I left out certain wars that were fought between them. But the bottom line is that Musharraf may or may not be able to survive having both of the old political parties back in Pakistan. My name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is I'm a federal worker.